The double moons of Kepler to be cast an eerie purple glow across the wasteland as Kim Taiwu checked his plasma rifle one last time before locking it away. 20 years of peace on this godforsaken rock, and he still couldn't shake the habit. The last stand diner sat like a metal island in an ocean of red dust, its neon sign flickering against the approaching storm clouds. Taiwu had built this place with his own hands after the war ended. Every rivet, every panel, every piece of reinforced glass designed to withstand the brutal iron storms that swept across this planet's surface. The mining colonies depended on travelers like him keeping the supply routes open. Even when corporate shuttles refused to fly, the first rumble wasn't thunder, Taiwu's enhanced hearing. A leftover from his military augmentations picked up the distinctive whine of modified plasma engines. He stepped outside, feeling the electric charge in the air that meant the storm was close, very close. The first motorcycle burst over the ridge like a metallic predator, its rider hunched low against the wind. 9 more followed, their engines screaming in harmony as they raced the approaching wall of electrical death. Taiwu had seen iron storms kill before. These riders had maybe 10 minutes before the lightning started, and out here in the open, that meant certain death. The bike slid to a stop in his parking lot, kicking up clouds of red dust. The riders dismounted quickly, their movements sharp and military precise despite the casual leather and metal they wore. Taiwu recognized the signs immediately. These weren't just bikers. These were soldiers. The leader stepped forward, pulling off her helmet to reveal short black hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her left arm was obviously cybernetic, the kind of military-grade replacement they gave to veterans who'd lost limbs in the Proxima Wars. A plasma-burned scar ran from her jaw to her collarbone, and her jacket bore the crimson eagle patch that marked her as one of the most feared biker gangs in the Outer Rim. "We need shelter," Park Ji-won said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to giving orders. "Storm's gonna kill us out there," behind her. The other riders were already eyeing the diner's entrances, calculating fields of fire and escape routes. Taiwu saw the telltale bulges of concealed weapons, the way they positioned themselves to cover each other's backs. Professional habits died hard. The youngest of the group, a kid who couldn't be more than 25, had his hand resting on what looked like a modified pulse pistol, Lee Dongmin. If Taiwu read his jacket patches correctly, bore the scars of recent combat, fresh wounds, barely healed, marked his face and hands. "Most places don't serve our kind," Ji-won continued, her cybernetic fingers drumming against her thigh. "We can pay. We don't want trouble." Taiwu had seen these same riders get turned away from Morrison's fuel stop just an hour ago. The corporate-owned chain had a strict no-bikers policy, especially for the Crimson Eagles. Too dangerous, they claimed, too likely to start fights or scare away the clean, respectable customers. But looking at these 10 figures, ice crystals forming on their leather jackets as the temperature dropped, Taiwu didn't see dangerous criminals. He saw himself and his squad, 20 years ago, stumbling out of a transport ship after 3 days of hell on Titan 7. He saw the same hollow look in their eyes, the same way they held themselves apart from the world that had sent them to fight and then forgotten them. "Sit anywhere you want," he said, stepping aside to let them pass. "Coffee's fresh, and I've got hot food coming off the grill." The bikers exchanged glances, suspicion written across their faces. Kindness was a rare commodity in their world, and experience had taught them to distrust it. Ji-won's hand moved instinctively toward her plasma pistol, but something in Taiwu's steady gaze made her pause. "How much?" asked Dongmin, the youngest rider. His voice carried the careful tone of someone who'd learned to expect the worst. "We'll settle up when the storm passes," Taiwu replied, already moving toward the kitchen. "Right now, You all look like you could use some hot food and a warm place to sit outside. The first lightning bolt split the sky with a crack that rattled the diner's reinforced windows. The iron storm had arrived with the fury of an angry god, turning the night into a throbbing nightmare of electrical death. No one would be traveling for the next several hours, maybe longer. The 10 bikers found themselves trapped with a stranger who, for reasons they couldn't understand, seemed genuinely glad to have them there as they settled into the worn booths and breathed in the smell of real coffee and grilled meat. Some of the tension began to leave their shoulders. Taiwo hummed an old military song as he worked, the same tune his sergeant used to sing before missions. Outside, the storm raged like the end of the world. But inside the last stand, something unexpected was beginning to grow. The iron storm turned the sky into a hellish light show for 3 straight days. Purple lightning cracked across the horizon, while electromagnetic pulses knocked out every piece of electronic equipment for miles round. Taiwo's diner became an island of warmth in a sea of electrical chaos, running on the military-grade backup generators he'd installed years ago. The Crimson Eagles had spread out across the diner like a tactical unit securing a position. They'd chosen seats that gave them clear views of all entrances, their weapons within easy reach despite the apparent safety. Old habits from the war, Taiwo recognized. He'd done the same thing himself for years after coming home by the second morning. The initial tension had started to fade. Taiwo kept the coffee flowing and the grill hot, serving plate after plate of real food to people who'd probably been living on ration bars and recycled protein for weeks. The bikers ate like starving wolves, but they were polite about it, saying please and thank you in voices that carried military precision. "You move like military," G1 observed, watching Taiwo work behind the counter. Her cybernetic arm whirred softly as she lifted her coffee cup. "The way you check corners, how you keep your back to the wall. You're not just some diner owner." Taiwo cracked eggs on the griddle with practiced ease, the sizzle filling the momentary silence. "Colonial Marines, 15th Infantry. Did 3 tours. In the Proxima Wars before I got smart enough to get out." The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to a mouth. The bikers exchanged glances loaded with meaning that only veterans could understand. "Which battles?" asked Choi In-ho, speaking for the first time since arriving. Half his face was covered in burned scars from some kind of energy weapon, and his voice carried the rasp of someone who'd breathed too much smoke and fire. "All of them," Taiwo replied quietly. "But Titan 7 was where it ended for me. Lost my whole unit in the first wave. Watched corporate executives send 18,000 soldiers into a meat grinder because they wanted to secure mining rights." The room went dead silent. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. 15th Infantry, whispered Lee Dongmin, the youngest biker. "You were the Ghost Company, the ones who held the northern ridge for 6 days against impossible odds." Taiwo's hand tightened on the spatula. He hadn't heard that name in 20 years. Ghost Company, they'd call them. Because after Titan 7, most of them were dead. The few survivors had been scattered to the winds, their heroism buried under corporate paperwork and classified reports. "We were there too," In-ho said, his scarred face grim. "Different unit, same slaughter. I was with the 23rd Assault Battalion. We were supposed to support your position. But command sent us to the wrong coordinates by the time we fought our way to you. It was too late." The stories began to flow like water breaking through a dam. How they'd returned from the war to find the benefits cut, their medical care denied, their sacrifices forgotten by a galaxy that had moved on. How they'd been branded as troublemakers when they complained, blacklisted from decent jobs, pushed to the margins of society. So we took to the road, explained Park So-young, a woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms, found others like us, veterans who'd been thrown away like broken tools. We formed the Crimson Eagles because we needed family. Real family that understood what we'd been through. We're not criminals, G1 added, her cybernetic fingers drumming against the table. We run supplies to the outer colonies, the ones the corporations abandoned. We protect convoys from raiders. We take care of our own because nobody else will. Young Song Min-jun had been quiet throughout the conversation, hunched over his coffee with his jacket pulled tight. Taiwu noticed he was favoring his left side, moving carefully like someone in pain, when the kid suddenly went pale and swayed. In his seat, Taiwu was already moving. Min-jun hit the floor hard, his jacket falling open to reveal a blood-soaked bandage wrapped round his ribs. The wound was infected, angry red streaks spreading outward from what looked like a plasma burn. He'd been hiding it for days, too proud or too scared to ask for help. Get him to the back room, Taiwu ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a battlefield medic. G1, help me lift him. In-ho, grab my medical kit from under the counter. They moved like the trained soldiers they were, efficient and coordinated. Taiwu's hands were steady as he cut away the makeshift bandage, revealing the full extent of the damage. The plasma burn was deep, infected, and potentially fatal if left untreated. This is going to hurt, he warned Min-jun, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. But I've done this before, trust me, for the next hour. Taiwu worked with the skill of someone who'd performed battlefield surgery under enemy fire. He cleaned the wound, applied antibiotics, and stitched the worst of the damage with supplies from his military-grade medical kit. The other bikers watched in silence, their respect for the diner owner growing with each precise movement. Why? Ji-won asked as Taiwu finished bandaging Min-jun's ribs. Why help us? We're nothing to you, just some bikers who got caught in a storm. Taiwu looked at the faces round him, seeing the same haunted expressions he'd carried for 20 years. These weren't criminals or troublemakers. They were soldiers who'd given everything for their galaxy and gotten nothing in return. They were his brothers and sisters in arms, scattered and forgotten, but still fighting. Because, he said quietly, washing the blood from his hands, we're all just trying to find our way home. The week after the storm had been the quietest in months. Taiwu went back to his usual routine of serving truckers, miners, and the occasional corporate executive who'd gotten lost on their way to the luxury resorts on the planet's northern continent. He'd almost convinced himself that the 3 days with the Crimson Eagles had been a dream, except for the extra medical supplies he'd ordered and the way he caught himself listening for the sound of them. Autorsical engines. Song Min-jun had recovered quickly, his young body healing from the infected wound with the help of proper medical care. Before leaving, he'd tried to pay for everything, pulling out a credit chip that probably represented his life savings. Taiwu had refused, of course. But the gesture had meant something to both of them now. As he prepped vegetables for the evening rush, Taiwu found himself thinking about the stories they'd shared. The Crimson Eagles weren't just a biker gang. They were a family forged in the fires of war. Bound together by shared trauma and mutual survival, they reminded him of his own unit, the bonds that had kept them alive when everything else had failed. The first vibration was so subtle he almost missed it, a tremor in the floor, like the rumble of distant thunder. But the sky was clear, and Kepler 440b's weather systems were predictable. This was something else entirely. Taiwu stepped outside, his enhanced hearing picking up the distinctive whine of multiple plasma engines. But this wasn't 10 bikes. This was something much, much bigger. The sound grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls that surrounded his diner. Then, cresting the ridge like a mechanical tsunami, they appeared, motorcycles, hundreds of them stretching back along the highway as far as the eye could see. The roar of their engines was deafening, a symphony of power and defiance that made the ground shake. At the head of the procession, the familiar crimson eagle banners flew proudly in the wind. But behind them came colors Taiwu had only heard about in whispered stories, the steel wolves, with their silver and black leather and military-grade weaponry, the Void Runners. Their bikes modified with salvaged spacecraft parts that glowed. With barely contained energy, the Plasma Hawks, elite pilots who'd turned to the road after being discharged from the colonial navy, and dozens of smaller groups, each with their own colors, their own stories, their own reasons for choosing the outlaw life over the corporate-controlled cities. The procession stretched for miles. A river of chrome and leather and defiance flowing across the desolate landscape. Taiwu had never seen anything like it. The combined roar of hundreds of engines was like standing next to a launching spacecraft, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. G1 dismounted first, her cybernetic arm catching the light of the setting sun. She looked different now, more confident, her shoulders straight with purpose. Behind her, the other eagles were grinning like they'd just pulled off the heist of the century. "Hope you've got enough coffee, old man," she called out, her voice barely audible over the dying rumble of engines. Taiwu looked at the sea of faces surrounding his diner. Hundreds of bikers, all watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to respect to something that might have been hope. His small parking lot was completely overwhelmed. Bikes parked in neat rows that extended out into the desert for hundreds of meters. "What is this?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. A massive figure stepped forward, easily 2 meters tall, with shoulders that looked like they could carry a small spacecraft. His leather jacket bore the silver wolf's head that marked him as president of the Steel Wolves, one of the most powerful biker gangs in the Outer Rim. Zhang Haiyanwu's face was crossed with scars from a dozen battles, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Word travels fast in our circles," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding respect. "Heard there was a diner owner who treated eagles like family instead of trash." More voices joined in as riders dismounted and gathered round. They came from all walks of life, united only by their shared experience of being cast aside by the galaxy they'd once served. Former soldiers, discharged pilots, blacklisted engineers, medics who'd lost their licenses for treating the wrong people. Corporate security tried to shut down our supply run to the Tau Ceti colonies, called out a woman whose jacket marked her as a Void Runner. Said we were disrupting legitimate business operations, legitimate business that left 3,000 colonists without medical supplies. Got turned away from Morrison's fuel stop again last week. Added another voice. Security said we were undesirable elements. This after I spent 3 years keeping their shipping lanes clear of pirates. The stories kept coming. Corporate harassment, discriminatory policies, systematic efforts to push veterans and outcasts to the margins of society. But running through all of them was a new thread, a story that had spread like wildfire through the underground network of bikers, smugglers, and outcasts who kept the forgotten parts of the galaxy running. The story of a diner owner who'd opened his doors to 10 stranded bikers and treated them like human beings. "We've been talking," G1 said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "All of us, every gang, every chapter, every independent rider from here to the galactic core, and we've got a proposition for you." She gestured to the sea of motorcycles surrounding them, hundreds of machines that represented freedom, rebellion, and the stubborn refusal to be forgotten. "If you're interested." The last stand had never been so crowded. Bikers filled every booth, lined the counter, and spilled out into the parking lot where they'd set up portable chairs and tables. The air was thick with the smell of leather, motor oil, and the kind of tension that came when hundreds of dangerous people gathered in one place. Taiwo moved through the crowd like a man in a dream, refilling coffee cups and taking orders for food he wasn't sure he could make fast enough. His small diner had become the unofficial meeting hall for what looked like the largest gathering of outlaw bikers in galactic history. At the center of it all sat the leaders. Ji-won and her Crimson Eagles had claimed a large corner booth, but they were sharing space with presidents and road captains from dozens of other gangs, the Steel Wolves, the Void Runners, the Plasma Hawks, and groups whose names Taiwo had never even heard whispered in the darkest corners of spacer bars. "Let me tell you what we really are," said Kang Soo-jin, her voice cutting through the low murmur of conversations. She was a small woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen the depths of space, her jacket bearing the wings of a former Navy pilot. The Free Riders Coalition isn't just some biker gang alliance. We're what's left of the people who actually kept this galaxy running. She gestured around the room, encompassing the scarred and weathered faces of hundreds of veterans. When the Proxima Wars ended, they discharged us like we were broken equipment. No pensions, no medical care, no recognition for what we'd sacrificed. So we made our own way. Nanji-siak, a mountain of a man with cybernetic legs that gleamed silver in the diner's light, picked up the story. We started running supplies to the outer colonies when the corporations pulled out. Said those settlements weren't profitable enough to maintain. Thousands of people would have died without us. We clear the shipping lanes of pirates, added another voice from the crowd. Corporate security won't patrol past the third ring. But we do. We've saved more merchant vessels than the colonial navy has in the past 5 years. The stories kept coming, painting a picture of a shadow network that operated in the spaces between legitimate society. They were smugglers, yes, but they smuggled medical supplies to plague-stricken colonies. They were outlaws, but they protected the innocent when no one else would. They were rebels, but they rebelled against a system that had forgotten the people who'd built it. We've been operating without a central hub for 20 years. Ji-won explained, her cybernetic fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop, meeting in abandoned warehouses, using encrypted communications, always staying one step ahead of corporate security. But that's not sustainable anymore. The corporations are getting bolder. Hyun-woo said, his scarred face grim. They're pushing into territories we've protected for decades. They want to control everything, even the routes to the colonies they abandoned. Taiwo felt the weight of their collective gaze as they laid out their proposition. The last stand would become the official way station for the Free Riders Coalition, a neutral ground where different gangs could meet, trade information, and coordinate their operations. A place where injured riders could get medical attention, where supplies could be distributed, where the scattered children of the galaxy's forgotten wars could find something resembling home. "We're not asking you to join our fights," Soo-jin said carefully. "We're asking you to be our Switzerland, a place where enemies can sit at the same table and work out their differences over coffee instead of plasma fire." The benefits were obvious. Steady business from hundreds of riders, protection from corporate harassment, and membership in a community that spanned star systems. But Taiwo had learned to look for the catch, the hidden cost that came with every deal. "There's more you need to know," Ji-won said, her expression turning serious. "Omega Corp has been buying up every independent business along this route. They want to build an automated supply hub here, cut out all the human elements. They've been making offers to force out the independents." Taiwo's stomach tightened. He'd been receiving those offers for months. each one more aggressive than the last, credits that seemed generous until you realized they were half what the property was actually worth. Veiled threats about safety inspections and tax assessments that would mysteriously find violations where none existed. Last week they made an offer to the Hendersons at the fuel station. Inho said quietly, when they refused, their permits got revoked. Some kind of environmental violation that nobody can find any evidence of. Morrison's fuel stop sold out 3 days ago. Added another voice. Una said he didn't have a choice. Corporate security made it clear that resistance wasn't an option. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Omega Corp wasn't just buying properties. They were systematically eliminating every independent business on the route, creating a monopoly that would give them complete control over trade between the inner systems and the outer colonies. With us backing you, Haimu said, his voice carrying the promise of violence barely held in check. They'll think twice about pushing. We've got influence they can't buy and weapons they can't match. And if they don't, Taiwu asked. Though he already knew the answer, the room fell silent. Then, slowly, G1 smiled. It was an expression that managed to be both warm and terrifying, like a mother's love combined with a predator's hunger. Then they'll learn why we're called the Free Riders Coalition, she said softly. And why smart people don't try to push round the people who've kept this galaxy running well. They counted their profits. 3 months had transformed the Last Stand from a lonely roadside diner into something that resembled a small military base. The original building now anchored a complex of interconnected structures that sprawled across what had once been empty, desert. Reinforced walls surrounded secure parking areas where hundreds of motorcycles could shelter from both storms and corporate security forces. The communications ray on the roof looked like something stolen from a battleship, its dish constantly tracking satellites and relay stations across 3 star systems. Inside, banks of computers hummed quietly, coordinating supply runs to forgotten colonies and tracking the movements of corporate security forces who'd grown increasingly aggressive in recent weeks. Taiwu barely recognized his own establishment. What had started as a simple diner now served as headquarters, hospital, armory, and sanctuary for the Free Riders Coalition. The main dining area had been expanded to accommodate the constant flow of visitors, while the back rooms housed everything from medical facilities to secure meeting spaces where gang leaders could plow, and operations without fear of corporate surveillance. Behind the counter, Taiwu moved with the efficiency of a man who'd found his true calling. He served coffee to a mixed crowd that would have been impossible to imagine before the storm that had changed ever. Yifeng, former colonial marine, sat next to corporate refugees who'd fled the suffocating control of the inner systems. Outer Rim colonists shared tables with active duty soldiers on leave, their uniforms marking them as sympathizers who secretly supported the Coalition's mission. The common thread wasn't their background or their origins. It was their recognition of dignity, respect, and the bonds forged by shared struggle against a galaxy that had forgotten its own defenders. "Order up," called Young Haijin from the expanded kitchen, her voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. She was Taiwu's new head cook, a former army medic who'd been blacklisted for treating undesirable patients. Her scarred hands moved with surgical precision as she prepared meals for the steady stream of hungry riders. The test of their new alliance had come just weeks after the formation of the Coalition. Omega Corp had sent a squad of security forces to negotiate Taiwu's departure, their black shuttles landing in the desert with military precision. They'd emerged in full combat armor, expecting to intimidate a lone diner owner into abandoning his property. Instead, they'd found 200 bikers surrounding the Last Stand, not threatening, not aggressive, just present. The message had been crystal clear. This place was protected. The corporate security forces had retreated without firing a shot, but everyone knew they'd be back with reinforcements. "We've got movement on the perimeter sensors," reportedly Dongmin, the young eagle who'd grown into one of the coalition's best scouts. His fingers danced across a holographic display that showed the surrounding area in real time. "Looks like another supply convoy from the Vega colonies," Taiwu nodded. "Already calculating food requirements and fuel needs." The last stand had become more than a restaurant. It was a command center where operations were planned, a sanctuary where the wounded could heal, and a symbol of resistance against corporate control. As he delivered plates of food to a table where coalition scouts were briefing colony representatives about upcoming supply runs, Taiwu reflected on how much had changed. The Free Riders Coalition had grown from a loose alliance of biker gangs into something approaching a legitimate shadow government. Their network of way stations now spanned 3-star systems, providing supplies and protection to settlements that the corporations had written off as unprofitable. Boss G1 called from her usual spot at the counter, her cybernetic arm interfacing directly with the communications ray. "We've got reports of raiders hitting the Tau Ceti supply lines. Steel wolves are mobilizing, but they could use backup." "What kind of raiders?" Taiwu asked, already moving toward the tactical display that dominated one wall of the diner. "Corporate-sponsored, by the look of it," G1 replied, her expression grim. "Too well-equipped to be independent pirates. Someone's trying to cut off the outer colonies again." The display showed the Tau Ceti system in 3 dimensions, with red markers indicating the locations of recent attacks. The pattern was clear to anyone with military training: a coordinated assault designed to strangle the supply lines and force the colonies to accept corporate protection. "Tell Iron Wu he's got full logistical support," Taiwu decided. "Whatever the steel wolves need, we'll provide." Outside, the rumble of engines announced another convoy's arrival. Through the reinforced windows, Taiwu could see the lights of dozens of motorcycles cutting through the darkness. Some carried supplies for the next relief mission. Others brought wounded comrades who needed medical attention that only the coalition could provide. In the corner booth that had become an unofficial command post, representatives from 6 different gangs were planning a coordinated response to the corporate raiders. Their voices were low and urgent, discussing tactics and logistics with the professionalism of Kreia soldiers. Young Haijin emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of sandwiches for the planning session. She paused beside Taiwu, her expression thoughtful as she watched the organized chaos of their operation. "You know," she said quietly, "this is what we were supposed to be fighting for in the first place. Not corporate profits or territorial expansion, but people, community, the idea that everyone deserves a chance to live free." Taiwu poured another cup of coffee and smiled. She was right. This was what they'd fought for in the war, what they'd lost and found again in the most unexpected way. Not just survival, but community. Not just existence, but purpose. The galaxy was vast and often cruel, but here in this small corner of it, humanity's greatest strength burned bright as the stars themselves, the capacity for compassion, loyalty. And standing together against the darkness had transformed a simple diner into something legendary. The end.